Alright, welcome back to part 2, inking a Dave Finch piece here from Batman issue that originally was inked by, I believe Matt Banney did the actual inks in the issue. I would love someday to be able to work with Dave. He's a very talented penciler, and if some of you aren't aware, his wife Meredith Finch is also a very talented writer. She's got a book that she put out through Image, and I penciled this and sent it to her, and she was really nice. She sent me some autographed copies of the book, and so they both seem to be very nice people. Taking the time, especially taking the time to autograph the books, package it, and send it on out to me. I'm very grateful for that. It was also very inspiring. If you're not familiar with my work, I'm also a penciler, and I penciled this issue. This page here. It was fan art that I did for her book, but inking has really helped me with my rendering and penciling, has also helped me with inking as well. If you're wanting to be a penciler, it's not a bad idea to pick up some inks and try to ink a few things, just to kind of get familiar with it, as to where your work's going to end up, and what it's like for the inker. It can help you out. It helped me with rendering in my penciling. I would like to learn coloring. I'm sure coloring would help me out as well. I know that there's a lot of pencilers out there who pick up painting because it helps them, with their penciled illustrations as well. And it's a creative outlet, because this becomes work, and it is creative, and it is fun, and at times, and most of the time, and it is therapeutic a lot. But it is work, and you're not necessarily doing pieces that you pick and choose, like where I can right now. I can pick and choose what I want to work on because it's for my portfolio, so I can pick all the cool, fun pieces, which is not the case when you're working on an actual book. Sometimes you get those boring pages that are just a big black page with a tiny little explosion in the middle of the page, or the page is just an explosion, or it's just a big tree or something, which it's determined by what's best for the storytelling, and you've got to ink that page. So that's one of the things about inking, is that sometimes, some little things can become tedious, but you really have to enjoy what you're doing. You really have to enjoy the medium, and have a lot of patience too, and discipline, because for any freelancer, even if you're not freelancing illustration, you ask any freelancer, and they'll tell you discipline. Anyone who works from home, you have to have focus. There are a lot of distractions at home, and you have to find a nice, comfortable area to work where there are less distractions. Wanting to get into comic books and working from home, means you may have to sacrifice your time from playing video games, watching movies, talking to friends and stuff on the phone, there can be a lot of distractions, and so you just have to discipline yourself and that eventually, you kind of find a routine and you get used to it, and you wake up, shower, breakfast, and then get started on inking. You know, um, wake up, shower, get the kids to school or something, and come back and start working. And then it just, you know, it's a routine from there. But you just gotta make eventually, just gotta make it a habit. You know. Fortunately for me, I'm not a real big video game guy, so it wasn't a big sacrifice for me to give up video games. But I am a big movie buff, and I do really like TV, a lot of TV shows. And the cool thing is, I can play them in the background. That's usually what I do. Is I have my desk is an L-shape computer desk, and what I do is then I created this little incline portable little board that I'm drawing on, and I place it on top of a flat surface, and it's got little legs that elevate the front of it and angles the desk so that I can work on it like my drafting table. And then right next to me, off camera to my right, is my computer. And I usually have a TV show playing in the background, just for white noise most of the time. A lot of times it's so that it's something in the background for me to ignore, so that I hyper focus on where I'm working on. And that brings me to how I printed this image. First a lot of these images you can find online. Just Google search, images. And you can also find a lot of them on DeviantArt. You have a lot of pencilers who put the portfolio on there. I myself have my portfolio on there. And I have a few pieces on there that I've illustrated that are high enough res for pencilers, inkers to download, and you can work over them. And my DeviantArt page is my name, Jimmy Reyes .deviantart.com, and I've got tons of pencils on there that you can work over. But there's also a lot of other pencilers, and a lot of them are really nice. A lot of artists really nice, and I have a few inking samples on there. I don't really have a lot of inking samples on there, not as much as I should have for somebody who wants to find work as an inker. It's the reason why I'm building up this portfolio pieces, because I've been fortunate enough to work on inking a few books lately, but they're not out yet, so I need something up there in the meantime. So these pencilers, I've asked them, and I said, hey, this is a link to my samples of my inks, and I'm working on my portfolio, and I would really love if I could have a high res image of the blah 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 illustration that you've placed online. That's not literally blah blah blah. It's like that drawing of Wolverine you did. I really like it. Would you mind if I ink it if I have a high res? And a lot of times these pencils are really nice, and they're like, yeah, sure, man. And they'll email me, pretty decent size, high res, and then I have these images, and then I take them in Photoshop and place them in the non-photo blue like you see right now. I put them in grayscale, and then I use a dual tone and choose two different blues, one light, one darker blue, and then put the image back to RGB, and then what I do after that is I take the image in Photoshop, make sure that it's all, sized to fit on 11 by 17 artboard, and then I get a blank sheet of Bristol board, depending on what you prefer to work on. This one is a 400 series 3-ply Bristol from Strathmore, and this one is a smooth surface, and so I then feed the sheet of paper through my Epson Workforce printer, and then it allows me to print onto the 11 by 17. It's a good printer, and it's really not as expensive as they used to be. Man, they were pretty pricey. I actually got mine at an office supply store. They had it on sale, and they had $100 off. So I ended up only paying $150 for it. So inking can be a bit of an investment. It's definitely costs more than penciling. The nibs. I buy a box of 12 nibs, and they're generally about $20, but I did find a supplier on Walmart.com, which is kind of like Amazon. They have a supplier on there who sells them to me for $12 a box, like $13. It's like $12.90 something, and then shipping's on like $3 or $4. So even then, I'm still paying, under $20 for it. Where other suppliers, it easily hits $20 with shipping. But even though it costs more to be an inker as far as your supplies and stuff, and inkers generally don't get paid the same page rate as pencilers, it's still a really good. I still enjoy the medium. I love, inking just as much as I do penciling. So I really don't have a preference. As you saw earlier in the video, I'm also a penciler. I can also draw. And so I may start making some videos of me penciling. So what I've kind of done here, and it kind of just automatically kind of happens. I don't really put a whole lot of thought into it. Is that I'm making this area that in the background of this image is actually smoke. So you really do want smoother, round lines, but I am varying the lines because smoke, is just kind of soft, cloud-like. So your lines want to be, round, and they want a roller coaster, And then I do break them up a little bit because I want to show kind of texture for that. So inking that was different than inking anything else on the piece. Where in part 1 of the video, I talk about the angled lines Dave Finch does around his figures. So you don't want angular lines around the clouds. That's not how clouds work. So if you're an aspiring inker, artist, good thing too is it helps me out a lot is, touching things, going and looking at real trees and looking at the textures. I don't sit there forever at the park or something and look like some crazy homeless person, but I might be crazy, but I'm not homeless. So no. So I go and I look, textures of trees and stuff like that, and I absorb it, into my brain, and my brain records it, and touch the tree, and it helps me out when I'm inking a tree. Whenever I want to ink that kind of texture, my brain's got the information in there, and telling my hand, this is what a tree should look like, you know. And it falls back to that information that's in there. You know, looking at the grass outside. How do the grass blades look? Each grass you look at, you know, your grass, if you're in California, it's going to look different than the grass that I've got here in Texas. But it'll still teach you and provide your imagination with a bit of reality, you know, information there. And then, so whenever you are drawing grass, smoke, trees, fabric, your brain recalls on that experience. And just the more information you have, you know, the better for your illustrations. And even for inking. Inking too, you are working in black and white. So black and white photos can help you out a lot. Not just for pencilers, you know, for their spotting blacks or rendering. You know, it's good for inkers too, because you get an idea of what a well-balanced black and white image looks like. So I'm going to try to stay within the camera here, because last video, part 1, I do apologize that I was inking pretty low on the table and my hand was almost off camera. So I'm just kind of looking around, little stuff around here, and go, what do I want to ink right now? And I was like, let's just do some thicker lines right here. So my nib, to fill in that black, this is torn fabric, so it's a little zigzag line there, but to fill in that black, I lightened up on my pressure on my nib. I didn't really put any pressure down. Had plenty of ink on the nib, so I knew that I could fill it in. Right now I knew that I didn't have enough ink on the nib, but based on the way the amount of ink was flowing off of it, I didn't have enough to fill this in, so I dipped it into my little jar that I put the Cornor ink. And if you're wondering what kind of ink I use, it's in video part 1 of the Dave Finch Batman piece that I'm inking. And I use Cornor ink, universal ink. And I show it in the video if you're wondering what it looks like. It's about $28, $30. Goes back to what I was saying about how pricey inking can be. And yes, inking is a bit expensive, because the ink alone costs quite a bit, but when I buy it in that larger quantity, because you know, you want to make sure you always have a good stock of supply, because you don't ever want to be on deadline and then unable to finish because you're waiting on ink to arrive. If, you know, you're having it shipped or driving around town looking for it at an art store, that time could be spent working on pages. And it all, you know, comes with experience, you know, with, once you start freelancing for a while, and you kind of know how much supplies of stuff you need, and learn as you go. I also use brush, as I mentioned in part 1 of the video, and the brushes can get a little pricey too. I have Winsor Newton Series 7 round number 2 brush. It's just the brand that I've was introduced to, and I've become very familiar and comfortable with it. That's the reason why I've stuck with Winsor Newton. I've been inking with that since the 90s. And I have been wanting to try the Raphael, I believe it's 8404. They're both Kolinsky Sables, and they're both watercolor brushes, and they're just two different brands. It's really no different than Ford or Chevy automotives. You know, it's really your preference, from what I'm told, because I've never tried the Raphael, but I have met a few people who have both, and they just tell me it's just really preference. And so, you know, cost can also be a factor. I know that the Raphael is about $5 cheaper, or a few dollars cheaper, I believe. So that could be a factor in your decision making as to what brush you want to try out. Fortunately for me, I have not been inking every day or drawing every day since the 90s, when I first started drawing. I would only draw once a week, sometimes twice a month, because the reality of adult life, I had to work, and wasn't in comic books, but I always kept my creative talent a little, you know, exercise it a little bit here and there. But had I been drawing every day, who knows what level I'd be at right now. So my advice is, if you really want to do something and really want to learn, devote 100% of your time to it. And you know, they say that it takes 10,000 hours to become an expert at something. You only get there by doing it over and over and over. Which is really true, because the more and more I've inked, the better and better I get at it. The more control I and familiar I become with my tools, the more control I gain, the less I struggle. And I did spend a lot of time studying the craft. Learn more by doing, but I did learn by watching. I did live next door in the 90s to a Wildstorm inker, and he eventually left Wildstorm and he went on to work for DC Comic Books, and I was very fortunate to live next door to him, and got to see pages come in, got to see him work on them, although at the time I wasn't an aspiring inker. At that time I was really just getting into comics and into the comic medium and wanting to draw. So I didn't attempt to ink anything or to learn inks. But being exposed to an inker, I learned what tools were used. I learned a lot of little tricks and tips that just by watching. So back then we didn't have the internet, and we didn't have videos on the internet like this, and so you had to really know somebody who was willing to teach you the tips and the tips of the tricks of the trade. But today, this generation gets to have videos, tutorials. So it's nice to spend time studying, learning, looking at the printed line work of your favorite inkers, study their line work, get an idea of what they do in certain area, how they ink certain areas, certain textures, and see if you can figure out why they chose that texture. It's great too if you ever get to look at the pencils, the raw pencils before it was touched by an inker, and then get to see the inked version, so that way you can kind of see what happens when the inker interprets the penciler's line work. And that's what I did a lot. First comic book I ever bought was Wildcats #1, and it was by Jim Lee Scott Williams. And I would stare at that artwork. I had no idea comic books had that kind of detail or that kind of line work. I was just in awe. I was like, wow, this is amazing stuff. I knew a whole level of respect for comic book artists. Only comics I ever knew of were the ones in the newspapers. But then it turns out I wasn't looking at the storytelling. I wasn't looking at the anatomy or the art as a whole. I was really studying Scott Williams' line work. I was looking at every little dot and line, and didn't realize, man, I absorbed all that when it came down to me, inking some of my own work. That's where I first started, is inking my stuff. People were telling me, hey, that's really not bad. It's really pretty good inks. And it was like I knew what line I wanted to put down, but I had to learn how to do it. I had to learn the tools. So that comes back to the 10,000 hour thing and learning by doing, even now, I'm still learning the tools. I learned how to put down certain lines. And I'm excited every time I learn something new. I feel that my work's evolving, and not becoming stagnant or comfortable with just doing the same thing over and over. But I don't really experiment a lot because don't really have to. Comics have been inked a certain way, a certain style for many years that it works. And so I want to learn that first. Learn why it's inked that way. Why do they do it that way? And then maybe later down the road I'll try something different. But right now I want to learn from the generation that came before me. So I've got this baby jar filled with water. I dip my nib in there. Old pair of jeans. And I can clean the nib. I can fold the jean, stick the jean through the ink well of the nib, clean it, try not to get too many fibers inside the nib as I'm cleaning the nib. but sometimes that happens, and then you gotta clean it again. So sometimes when I throw my line, it doesn't come out perfect. I can go back and always touch it up. Just rotating for a different angle, and to make sure everything looks good, just to get a different perspective on the artwork that I may not have noticed from the other angle. Creating some holding lines right here, because this is going to be black. And I like to sometimes, take a look at the artwork and pick my head up on the drafting table. Just to, kind of step back and look at the art, just to make sure everything is looking good, or looking the way that I had envisioned when I first started. The way I envision interpreting the pencils. The fabric here is ripped, kind of Hulk-like, so I put extra little squiggly lines on there that weren't there, just to help the viewer's eye to be aware that those are torn fabric. I don't want to overpower the drawing by adding a lot of rendering that isn't necessary, that isn't there. But your job as an inker is to aid the penciler in adding texture, a few little details here and there. So I'm going to make this video in several parts, maybe like a part 1, part 2, maybe up to part 4. My phone that I'm using to record this with does not want to export video. That's too large for some reason. I think it's because my phone is full of a bunch of junk in there. So here's another little end of the, so let's see if that actually stays even after I've rendered it. This looks like it's a shadow underneath one of these little folds of fabric. this whole image will not be inked with just the nib. There are a few little thicker lines up here that I want to use a brush for, mostly because I'm familiar with the tools and know the different type of line work I will get out of each tool, but I am a little undecided on that. And that's kind of what my brain starts thinking ahead of time, and thinking, I'm aware of where I'm at, what I'm inking, but my brain's thinking ahead, and I have the option of using the nib on it. I can also use a 108 nib, which generally give me the same look of my 102, but in a thicker, larger variation of that line. So if I want to be consistent and keep something to keep it looking like nib work, I'll use that 108 nib. If I need to do this exact same line work but in a larger scale, I'll use that nib, because it's so much easier with the 108 than trying to sit there with the 102 filling in all that black space. So I threw the line kind of quick there and lightened up on the pressure. Gives me a thinner, smoother line. And if you're not as comfortable yet with the 102, just practice throwing a bunch of different lines on a piece of paper. Or get pieces of artwork that you have prints like this and just start inking them. It's okay if they don't come out right. It's okay if you struggle with the 102 with using the nib, or if you're learning the brush and you're struggling, it's okay, because it gets easier. And it's just like anything else that you're learning. It will eventually get easier with repetition. You just have to be patient. So if you guys do like this video, I can put up videos of me penciling, show rendering, show how I rendered that rose cover that I showed at the beginning of the video that I drew. If you're interested in learning how to render your illustrations. So I rotate the image because I'm going to throw the line in the opposite direction here. And the great thing about the nib is that it'll match that end, and I can do the same image, kind of creating a line with two arrow points on the end of it on opposite ends. You can do that with the nib, depending on the direction that you throw your line. Not every line has to be perfect, because it is a hand-drawn illustration. But you do want to have control of your tools but you don't want it to be too neat and clean. You don't want it to be stiff. And I did mention that before, but it's an important tip, you know, that I feel that it is important. So I felt it was worth repeating. So right here I'm going to place a hold line, and that's going to hold in the black that I'm going to fill in. It's basically like putting a fence up around a yard that you're going to eventually put some grass in there. And these angular lines are mostly for style that I'm putting down here, because I feel that the penciler, Dave Finch in this case, has drawn it that way. So I want to stick with his style. So here on the foot, Dave has drawn a lot of these little lines here. A lot of them are because of where the tendons meet. Some are where veins are on your foot. Your foot has a lot of bones. Majority of the human bones are in your hands and feet. So there's a lot of little tendons here. And that's what he's drawn these little lines for, to kind of show that, you know, you don't have to go in and draw every single one, but he's given you enough information to let you know that that's a foot and it has these tendons, and your brain does the rest of the work and puts it together and says, hey, this is a foot. Just things to keep in mind, be aware when you're inking. And the toes are pointed down, they're kind of curled. Since they're in a curled position and they're down, and the light source is up top, the bottom of this toe is in black. And that's what Dave's done. But right here, this toe isn't in black. But because these are in black, I'm gonna do the same with that one. When you work with a penciler, you know, a lot of times you can just send them an email. Or if you get their number, you just call them up and say, hey, the drawing has this in it, and did you intend for this or for that? And, you know, sometimes you're able to do that. And when you can't, you need to make an executive decision based on the artwork. And deadline, of course, dictates, if you're able to do that and wait for a response. There's a little bit of light right here, it looks like, where the ankle joint is. I'm not sure that you would actually see that with the cape, Batman's cape right over that. But it's there, so I'm going to leave the little halo there. Halo just being the little ring of white around it.